There are places in the void where light itself goes to die. They call them warp storms, vast churning tempests of unreality that swallow entire fleets and silence whole star systems. But to those of us who have gazed too long into their heart, they are not storms at all. They are wounds, open, bleeding wounds in the skin of existence, and something on the other side is breathing through them. I remember the first time I saw one. The void around our vessel had grown unnaturally still, as if the stars were holding their breath. Then came the colors. Colors no sane mind should witness, shapes that did not belong to geometry, whispers that pressed themselves into my skull. The Vox crackled, the hull groaned, and I felt it. A pull not of gravity but of thought. It wanted us closer. It wanted me. They told me the warp is just a reflection of the mind, a sea of emotion given form. They lied. The warp is alive, and the storms that haunt it are not born from us, but from something far older, watching us from behind the veil. If you can still hear my voice across the noise of the Astronomicon, then listen closely. What I'm about to tell you is not written in any Imperial archive. It was meant to be forgotten, buried beneath 1,000 prayers. But the warp remembers, and tonight so will you, so before we drift deeper into the storm, steady your mind, breathe slowly, and anchor your soul to the light of the Emperor. And if you wish to walk with me through the dark, through the unseen corridors of the Immaterium, then lend me your faith. Like this transmission if you still believe the Emperor guards us. Share it so others may not lose themselves to the echoes. And subscribe, because next time the storm comes, you will want to remember my voice. The silence between stars, I have heard that silence in space is pure. They say it is the sound of peace, of infinite calm stretching between the stars. But those who say that have never drifted near the edge of a warp storm. They have never heard the silence that breathes. We were 3 standard days from the nearest relay when the quiet began. At first, no one noticed. The hum of the plasma drives dulled to a soft murmur. The deck lights dimmed as if the ship itself were growing tired. I remember walking the corridor between the navigator's sanctum and the observation bay. The air felt thin, stretched, like sound itself was being pulled apart. Even the crew's footsteps seemed to vanish mid-echo. By the second day, the void outside looked different. The stars weren't twinkling anymore. They hung motionless like eyes that had forgotten how to blink. And every time I closed my lids, I saw after-images that shouldn't have been there. Burning trails of color in shapes that twisted too slow, as if the universe itself was trying to whisper in geometry. The St. Halitus was an old ship. Its hull bore the scars of centuries, its prayers etched deep into the steel by generations who had feared the same darkness. I now felt crawling beneath my skin. I could sense it, the warp shifting like an ocean swelling beneath a storm no one else could see. In the navigator's sanctum, incense hung heavy, curling in patterns that refused to rise straight. My attendants whispered litanies from the Codex Astronomica, their voices trembling through their rebreathers. One of them, Cassian, was staring too long at the observation lens. When I called his name, he didn't answer. His pupils had dilated wide, black as the void itself. "Navigator," he said finally, in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "It's singing." There was no song, not to the ear, mine, but somewhere. Deep within the Immaterium, something was singing. A hum that brushed the mind, faint but constant, like the resonance of a distant bell. It pulsed through thought rather than air, too low to be measured, too perfect to be natural. By the time I reached the bridge, the Vox had begun to falter. No static, no noise, just absence. Even the servitors paused in their tasks, their mechanical limbs hanging mid-motion as though the very concept of time had hesitated. The captain, an old veteran named Lucerne, stood by the viewport with his hands clasped tight around the rosary of the Imperial Aquila. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "The Astronomicon's gone dim," he whispered. "Our bearings flicker every 30 seconds. Cogitators report no fault." I took the navigator's throne, my mind reaching outward into the void. And there it was in the silence, vast and unending. No currents, no tides, just stillness as if the warp itself had died. For a moment I thought this was mercy, that perhaps the storm had passed us by. But then I felt it, a tremor, faint, impossibly distant yet unmistakable, like the heartbeat of something colossal stirring beneath the fabric of reality. It came again and again, rhythmic, patient, alive. "Lucerne," I said quietly, "hold the course. No jump. Not yet." He turned then, his face pale beneath the scarred metal of his augmetic eye. "Navigator, we can't hold forever. The Geller field's fluctuating. The generator priests are already—" I raised a hand. "If we jump blind, we die blind. Whatever this is, it's not drift. It's waiting." The crew didn't understand, not yet. They thought of warp storms as violent things, thunderous, screaming, chaotic. But this was worse. This was patience, a silence that wasn't empty but watching. As I opened my inner sight once more, I glimpsed the faint shimmer of the Immaterium's veil. It rippled faintly like thin ice under strain. Beyond it, something moved, not with shape or form, but with intention. It pressed close, curious, maybe even hungry. The first whisper came that night, a breath against my ear that spoke my name, not aloud, but inside the rhythm of my own thoughts. I turned sharply, half expecting to see one of my attendants. The chamber was empty. Only the candles burned, flickering without breeze. When I slept, and if it could be called sleep, I dreamed of water. An endless sea of black glass, its surface trembling beneath a crimson sky. And far below the surface I saw faces, familiar, human, pressed against the glass, mouths moving in silence, eyes wide with terror. I woke gasping, my skin damp with cold. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw a condensation on the inside of the viewport, fingerprints fading quickly. The silence was growing louder. By the next cycle, the ship no longer felt alive. It breathed, yes. The engines still thrummed faintly. The Geller field still pulsed around us like a failing heartbeat. But there was no warmth in the sound. It was as though we were drifting through the body of something dead. The lights flickered in irregular rhythms, sometimes dimming to black for the length of a full prayer. Crewmen stopped speaking above whispers, and even those whispers began to warp, words stretching, echoing too long in narrow corridors, repeating themselves a heartbeat too late. I passed two voidsmen arguing near the shrine deck. One accused the other of repeating every sentence he spoke, but the second man swore he hadn't opened his mouth at all. Something was bending the sound inside the ship. The captain ordered the choir servitors to sing continuously, their mechanized voices layering hymn upon hymn to keep the crew's minds anchored to the Emperor's light. The sound filled every corridor, a soft metallic chant that should have been comforting. But after hours of it, the notes began to twist. A second voice joined, faint, hidden between the harmonics. A human voice, a plea. When I entered the sanctum again, Cassian was gone. The attendant said he had walked calmly into the void lock and opened the air seal, without hesitation, without expression. They found no trace of his body. I ordered his name recorded in the remembrance shrine, though in truth I suspected he hadn't died. Not fully, because the hum had grown stronger. I sat once more upon the navigator's throne, the silver cables wrapping around my temples, connecting my mind to the vessel's sensors. Beyond the physical void, beyond the fading light of the Astronomicon, I opened the eye that only navigators possess. The warp did not look as it should. Where there should have been tides of light and shadow, emotion, thought, the dreamscape of humanity's collective will, there was only stillness, an endless mirror stretching in every direction, fractured faintly with lines of crimson. And through those cracks I saw flashes, movement like silhouettes swimming beneath frozen glass. I withdrew instantly, my breathing ragged. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. I had bitten my tongue without realizing it. One of the attendants reached forward to steady me, but his face flickered. For a fraction of a second, it was not his. "Navigator," he whispered. I stared at him too long before answering. "Keep the wards burning. Double the litanies." The following hours blurred into a fever of waiting. The machine spirits were restless. The servitors malfunctioned, moving in stutters and pauses as if obeying orders whispered from elsewhere. Lucerne reported that our astropath had gone silent. Her body was alive, but her mind, gone, replaced by something like static. We sealed her in the chapel. That was when the first tremor hit. It wasn't physical at first. It was inside the skull. A pulse that rippled through every thought, every dream. I heard someone scream through the vox, though no one knew where the signal came from. The hull groaned, bulkheads expanding and contracting like lungs. Then came the light. Through the observation port, I saw it, a distant shimmer, faint as candle flame, yet impossibly vast. It flickered, expanded, then folded in on itself, like the fabric of reality was struggling to remember its own shape. Lucerne gripped the console. Warp distortion. It's forming ahead of us. Before he could finish, the light surged outward, turning the void into liquid color. The stars vanished, swallowed by rippling currents that bent and tore at geometry. The hum that had haunted us for days rose into a full tone, a sound like every choir in the galaxy singing one long, perfect note. Men clutched their heads. Some wept, some laughed. Through my inner sight, I saw the warp storm awakening. The cracks in the mirror were spreading, light bleeding from within. But what chilled me most was not the storm itself. It was what I saw inside it. Shapes. Human silhouettes drifting just beneath the surface of the energy. Too many to count. They reached upward, mouths open as if drowning in molten glass. And I knew then these were not illusions. These were souls. Lost navigators, dead psykers, voices that had once whispered prayers into the void. Now trapped within it. They were trying to speak. The sound burst into my skull. Not words, but emotion. Grief, terror, longing. A storm not of wind, but of memory. Every thought that humanity had ever cast into the Immaterium was swirling here, condensed into a maelstrom of pain and remembrance. And still, deeper beneath it all, something stirred. Watching. Waiting. I tore the cables from my temples, gasping, my vision spinning in and out of reality. My attendants shouted, their voices distant as if underwater. The captain's voice echoed through the Vox, fractured but urgent. Navigator, we can't hold. The Geller field's tearing apart. I looked out through the viewport and saw the first tendrils of the storm reach toward us. Filaments of light that moved like smoke underwater, slow and deliberate. They brushed the hull, and where they touched, the metal screamed. The silence was gone now. The universe was roaring, and yet beneath it all I could still hear that voice, murmur soft, constant, close. Come closer. The first tendrils of the storm kissed our hull like fire made of memory. The void outside was no longer black. It shimmered and folded like oil over glass, blooming into impossible colors that shouldn't exist. Every sensor burned out one by one, screens drowning in static that looked like faces. When the first of the crew began to scream, I knew the Geller field had faltered. The ship convulsed. Bulkheads rattled, air turned heavy. The sacred wards etched along the corridors began to glow faintly, the Emperor's sigil flickering as if it were gasping for air. We had drifted too close. Lucerne shouted orders through the Vox, but half the crew didn't hear him. They were hearing something else. Whispers through the metal, the sound of their own voices calling from somewhere beyond the hull. I stumbled toward the viewing platform, each step feeling slower than the last. The air felt thick, syrupy, and the lights bent around my vision like they were underwater. Outside the viewport, the warp storm unfurled. Vast, elegant, merciless. It didn't rage like a tempest. It bloomed. Each wave of light was a pulse of thought, emotion bleeding through the Immaterium, spilling into our world. The warp wasn't invading us. We were dissolving into it. The chanting of the choir servitors faltered. For a heartbeat, the entire ship fell silent. Then every voice, human, mechanical, psychic, and one screamed at once. The sound hit like a wall pressing into the skull, vibrating in the bones. Lights burst. Machinery tore itself apart. The Geller field collapsed. In that instant, reality folded. The corridor around me melted into a blur of shifting walls and dripping light. Time lost its rhythm. Seconds became hours, hours became heartbeats. I could see through the metal, through the decks, into the warp beyond. It was not distance. It was thought, alive and endless. I felt it inside my head, peeling through my memories like a curious child. It showed me my past, my first voyage as a navigator, the laughter of my mother before the implants, the light of Terra's golden horizon. And then it took them away one by one until all that was left was the hum. That song. The voice came again, clearer now. Feminine, ancient, soothing. You always returned to me. I turned, and for a moment she stood there, a figure woven of light and smoke, her face almost human, almost familiar. The edges of her body drifted into fractal patterns that folded in and out of sight. Who are you? I asked, though the words felt useless. They came out heavy, echoing in slow motion. She smiled, and the motion rippled through the storm like a wave. A memory, a mother, a wound that remembers the touch of light. Her hand reached out. Through the distortion I could see the void outside. stars twisting like sparks in her palm. "You call them storms," she whispered. "But they are dreams. You tear them open every time you travel the sea of souls. Every time you burn faith to reach the stars, another dream dies. And I awaken." Her words pressed against my mind, soft but crushing. Images flooded in. Whole civilizations adrift in thought, fragments of lost worlds, faces of the forgotten. I saw psykers burning like candles across the galaxy, each one screaming into her depths. The ship trembled again. The bridge crew was gone now, or perhaps they had never been. I could still hear Lucerne's prayers echoing through the Vox, looping endlessly like a broken hymn. The voice that had guided us was now just a reflection, trapped between realities. I tried to move, but the deck was gone beneath my feet. I floated, suspended in light. The St. Helidus hung in the storm like an insect trapped in amber. Around it, human faces drifted, translucent, silent, beautiful. Souls caught in the current of eternity. And then, for the first time, I understood the truth. Warp storms were not random tides. They were memories, echoes of thought, fragments of lives too heavy to fade. Every storm was the graveyard of a civilization, a scar where the collective memory of countless souls had bled into the Immaterium and refused to die. We hadn't stumbled into a storm. We had disturbed a tomb. The realization hit me like gravity returning. I fell hard to the deck, gasping, the ship's gravity returning in jerks and spasms. The Vox came alive with static and half-voices. Someone was crying. Someone else was laughing. Through the viewport, the storm's light dimmed slightly, not retreating, but blinking, like the closing of an enormous eye. Lucerne's voice broke through, faint and fragmented. "Navigator, report." "What in the throne's name is that thing?" I didn't answer. I could still feel her gaze on me, the memory of a mother or perhaps a god or perhaps something far worse. The storm was speaking, but not in words. In hunger, in memory. And deep within, I could feel the storm's pulse syncing with my own heartbeat. It wasn't over. The silence between the stars was only the breath before the scream. The storm awakens. There is no horizon inside the warp, only color, thought, and the endless folding of what used to be time. When the storm took us, it didn't drag the St. Helidus through space. It swallowed us whole. I remember the moment our last contact with reality vanished. The Astronomicon winked out. The machine spirits died, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't feel the Emperor's light. It was like being torn from the womb of creation. The bridge was chaos. Lucerne shouted orders no one could follow. Foxlines screamed with 1,000 overlapping voices, many of them our own echoes from moments that hadn't happened yet. The ship's deck stretched and shrank with each breath, metal groaning like an animal in pain. A servitor detached from its mount and drifted past me, whispering the litany of protection in reverse. Its eyes bled static. Its jaw kept moving long after its voice was gone. Through it all, the hum persisted, that same tone, eternal and unbroken, vibrating through my bones. I realized then that it wasn't a sound from outside. It was inside us now. The storm was resonating with every living thought aboard the St. Helidus. It was feeding. Lucerne clutched the aquila around his neck and turned to me, his voice raw. "Navigator! Can you see a way through?" I closed my eyes and opened the inner one. The sight granted by the third gene of the Navigator houses, the cursed eye that perceives the warp. The universe split open before me. We were surrounded by titanic spirals of light, stretching infinitely in every direction. They pulsed with color, each hue a different emotion, grief, rage, ecstasy, despair, all bleeding together into a single ocean of madness. The St. Helidus drifted like a leaf between worlds that weren't worlds at all, just thoughts given shape. At the edges of perception, I saw them again, the silhouettes from the mirror. Souls or fragments of them, drifting like ash through the current. Each one flickered with memory. A child clutching a doll, a soldier dying mid-prayer, a mother holding her infant in a flood of fire, human echoes caught in eternity, and beyond them further still were shadows vast enough to blot out whole constellations, shapes too enormous to comprehend, moving with the patience of gods. They didn't notice us, or they pretended not to. I forced my mind to focus on navigation lines, on what remained of reality. I searched for any path that could lead us out. But every corridor of the warp bent back upon itself. Every route ended where it began. Lucerne's hand fell on my shoulder. Anything? There is no route, I whispered. We are inside the storm's heart. He exhaled, a sound caught between a laugh and a prayer. Then, Emperor, preserve us. The lights flickered again, and when they steadied, the bridge had changed. The walls breathed. The air shimmered with faces. Faint, translucent, mouthing silent words. The hymn of the servitors returned, warped and slow, repeating a single phrase. We are remembered. We are remembered. Lucerne backed away, drawing his bolt pistol as if it could harm ghosts. What is this? The warp doesn't forget, I murmured. Every death, every prayer, every scream that entered it. Remains. Something thudded against the viewport. We turned, readied, and there, pressed against the glass, was a face. Pale, distorted, featureless except for the mouth. It was whispering my name. Lucerne fired instinctively. The glass didn't crack, but the face smiled. Then it melted back into the storm, leaving only ripples of color behind. Navigator. The captain's voice trembled. How do we fight this? We don't, I said. We endure. But even as I spoke, I felt my resolve slipping. The hum was inside my skull now, shaping my thoughts, filling them with memories that weren't mine. I saw Terra, golden and eternal, but covered in cracks of light. I saw a child's hand reaching for mine through liquid fire. I saw the Emperor, not as a man upon a throne, but as a flickering ember trying to stay lit in an ocean of night. The storm pulsed again, and the ship answered. The decks groaned, and a new sound filled the air. A heartbeat, slow and immense, echoing through the hull. That's when I understood. The warp storm wasn't merely energy. It had rhythm. It was alive, and it had just noticed we were inside it. The lights dimmed. Every Vox channel opened at once, broadcasting a single human voice. Cassian's voice. You shouldn't have come here. The hum grew louder, vibrating the very air. The crew dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as if something were trying to crawl into their minds through the sound itself. I pressed my palms to my temples, fighting to hold my thoughts together. Emperor, guide me. The hum stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Then, somewhere deep within the ship, a single word echoed through every speaker, soft as breath. Remember. There is no such thing as silence in the warp. Even when the noise fades, something still breathes behind it. That was what I realized when the word remember faded into the air. It didn't stop echoing. It simply sank deeper, like a command that had entered the bones of the ship. Lucerne stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the hololith. The display no longer showed our trajectory, only a single image, a vast spiraling storm, its center pulsing like a heart. The Emperor's light. He whispered. It's gone. Gone. The words hit me like a blade. Every navigator feels the Astronomicon like a pulse, a thread of golden warmth across the void. Without it, we are blind. But this was worse. It wasn't just absent. It had been erased. The ship drifted, engines cold. Some crew began to pray aloud. Others tore off their rosaries, screaming that the Emperor had abandoned them. And beneath it all, that hum began to return. Faint, but steady. Like the storm was inhaling again. I closed my eyes, searching for meaning in the chaos. The warp doesn't speak in words. It speaks in emotion, in fragments of memory. I reached out with the third eye once more, and the world fell away. I was standing in a place that wasn't a place. A corridor made of light and smoke, stretching in every direction. Shapes flickered within it, the crew, walking endlessly in circles, their faces blurred, their bodies overlapping like echoes caught in time. Then I saw Cassian. He stood at the far end of the corridor, turned away, his body flickering between moments. Alive. Dead alive again. His voice drifted toward me, layered over itself. You shouldn't have come here. I tried to stop it. Stop what? I asked, though I wasn't sure if I was speaking aloud. The remembering. He turned then, and for the first time I saw his face clearly. Or what was left of it. His eyes were empty, filled only with the colors of the warp. You think the storms are chaos, but they're memories. Every one of them. Every world the Imperium burned. Every soul cast into the void. Every scream that was never answered. They collect here. They become the storm. The air around him shivered, and suddenly I was back on the bridge. My heart was pounding. My hands trembled. Lucerne was staring at me. Navigator, what did you see? Ghosts, I said quietly. but not of the dead. Of us, he frowned. Meaning? The warp is reflecting us back, our pain, our history. It's remembering everything humanity has done. As if in answer, the walls began to ripple again and the air filled with sound, 1,000 voices murmuring at once. At first it was incomprehensible, but then words began to form. Holy Terra! Holy Terra! It was a chant, but it was wrong. The tone twisted, the rhythm turned backward. The words became something else entirely. Erat Erimus, Erimus Memoria. I knew High Gothic well enough to understand it. We will be. We are memory. Lucerne stumbled back, his face pale. Emperor, save us. But the Emperor was silent. Suddenly the floor tilted, violently. Consoles sparked. Sparks rained down like fireflies. The hum roared to life, deafening now. Something massive brushed against the ship. Not metal, not energy, but something aware. The hull screamed under the pressure. We were being touched. On every screen, the storm's heart began to pulse faster. Inside it, faint shapes moved. Thousands of them, all human. Soldiers, priests, children. An entire civilization made of echoes, and they were looking at us. The crew screamed as the voices grew louder. We remember. We remember. Lucerne gripped my arm, shouting over the chaos. Can you break us free? I tried, and by the throne I tried. I reached into the warp again, searching for any crack, any whisper of reality. And for a single heartbeat I found it. A flicker of starlight, impossibly distant. But something was already there. Something watching me, a colossal eye opened in the storm. Not human, not godly, just ancient. Its gaze pierced straight through the ship, through me, and I felt it. The realization that the warp doesn't just feed on fear or death. It feeds on memory itself. Every thought we have, every sin, every prayer whispered in the dark. It consumes and preserves them, endlessly reliving them as storms. The warp storms aren't chaos made flesh. They are humanity's reflection. Lucerne's voice broke through the noise. Navigator, what do we do? I turned to him slowly, the colors of the storm reflected in my eyes. We don't fight it, I said. We remember. And then, before the captain could respond, the ship's systems died completely. Darkness swallowed us whole. Only one sound remained, the heartbeat of the storm. Boom, boom, boom. It wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the ship, inside us. The ship that dreamed. When light returned, it wasn't ours. It was dim, flickering, almost alive. A bluish haze that rolled through the corridors like breath. I felt it first in my veins, a tremor of awareness, as though something vast had exhaled, and the ship inhaled in answer. The Eidolon was no longer adrift, it was dreaming. I didn't realize it at first, none of us did. We thought we'd survived, that the storm had passed, and this was simply the aftermath. But then the ship began to whisper. At first it was metal shifting, the usual groans of the hull under stress. Then words began to take form in those sounds. A child's laughter rippled through the ventilation shafts. Footsteps echoed where no one walked. The scent of incense drifted through the air, the kind burned only in the cathedrals of Terra. Cassian's voice returned next. Do you remember the old songs? He whispered. I froze. His voice came from the Vox grill on the wall, from the empty air, from everywhere. I turned, searching for the source, but there was nothing. Then I noticed the crew. They were moving strangely, slow, uncertain, as if the world around them no longer obeyed time. Some walked through each other without noticing. Others stopped mid-step, eyes glazed, their mouths forming words I couldn't hear. Lucerne's voice crackled through the intercom. All personnel to the bridge. Now. When I arrived, the captain was staring at the void display again, but this time it didn't show stars. It showed scenes, a vast golden plain beneath twin suns, an army kneeling before a figure of light, a city burning beneath rain that fell upward. Each image flickered, unstable, fragments of memory looping endlessly. This isn't a sensor feed, Lucerne said. It's us. I looked closer and realized what he meant. The faces in those scenes were ours, the same crew, the same uniforms, but different ages, different lives. as if we had lived these moments before and would again. I reached toward the display, my fingers trembling. The surface rippled beneath my touch like water, and suddenly I was there, standing on that golden plain. The light was blinding, endless, pure. I could feel it pressing against my skin, filling my lungs, burning my eyes. But it didn't hurt. It remembered me. All around me, thousands of warriors knelt, the first humans to touch the stars. I could feel their hope, their fear, their devotion to something beyond them. And above them all stood the Emperor, not as a god, but as a man who bore the weight of eternity. He raised his hand, and the storm answered. The sky tore open, and from the wound came color, not light, not shadow, but everything between. The first warp storm was born, not from malice, but from remembrance. Humanity had touched the infinite, and the infinite had responded. Then the vision shattered. I was back on the bridge, gasping, my hand still pressed against the console. Lucerne was shaking me. "Navigator, what did you see?" I looked into his eyes and whispered, "The birth of the warp." He went pale. "That's heresy." "I know," I said softly, "but it's also true." Silence settled between us. The ship creaked again, the sound deep and rhythmic, like breathing. Every console flickered with faint images now, memories of the crew, scenes of old battles, lost worlds, broken promises. The ship's systems are merging with the warp, I realized. It's not just alive, it's remembering for us. Lucerne turned toward me, his face hard. "Can it be stopped?" I hesitated. "Would you stop your own mind from dreaming?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Outside the viewport, the storm began to shift. The swirling colors parted slightly, revealing a faint shape. Like a vast cathedral adrift in the void, its spires reaching upward into nothing. It pulsed in rhythm with our hearts. The Eidolon was being drawn toward it. As we drifted closer, I felt something inside me fracture, not in pain, but in recognition. The closer we came, the more memories flooded through me. Faces I'd never seen, worlds I'd never walked, prayers I'd never spoken. They weren't mine, yet they were. And then through the static, Cassian's voice whispered once more, "It's not just remembering you, it's building you." "What do you mean?" I murmured. But there was no reply. Only the soft sound of the ship's pulse, the endless heartbeat of a dream that refused to end. Lucerne spoke quietly, almost reverently. "Then let it dream, navigator. Perhaps it dreams of salvation." I turned back toward the void, watching as the cathedral loomed closer, its doors opening like a mouth, golden light spilling out. For the first time I understood, the warp wasn't trying to destroy us. It was trying to show us what we were made of. But even dreams have teeth. As the light engulfed the bridge, I felt the air twist again, the warmth turning cold, the peace turning sharp. Something waited beyond those doors, and it wasn't mercy. The ship's heartbeat quickened, and then everything went white. When the light faded, we were no longer aboard the Eidolon. At least, not the ship as we knew it. The metal beneath my boots was still familiar, but its shape had changed. Corridors stretched into impossible angles, archways bent toward unseen horizons, and the air itself hummed with consciousness. The warp had taken our vessel and reimagined it, folding its soul into something sacred and wrong at once. The others appeared around me, scattered across the grand hall that had once been the bridge. Where consoles once stood now rose pillars of golden metal, carved with faces, our faces, frozen in mid-breath. They watched us as we moved, their stone eyes following every step. Lucerne's voice trembled. "Throne of Terra, what have we become?" No one answered. From the far end of the chamber, light spilled through colossal doors that stood half open. Beyond them lay the cathedral I'd seen in the storm, vast, radiant, calling us forward. Every instinct screamed to stay back. But the sound that drifted through those doors was irresistible. It was singing, soft, human, mournful. Like the echo of a billion souls whispering the same hymn across eternity. Cassian's voice joined it. We are what the warp remembers. Walk and you'll see. I didn't want to follow the sound, but my feet did. They moved on their own, compelled by something ancient, something that knew my name before I ever had one. The moment I crossed the threshold, everything changed. The light became liquid, flowing over my skin like warmth from a fire. The air smelled of old parchment burning oil and the faint sweetness of incense. Rows of pews lined the cathedral floor, not made of wood but of bone polished until they gleamed. Each seat held a figure cloaked in shadow. Their heads were bowed, hands clasped in silent prayer. Lucerne stepped beside me. Crew? I shook my head slowly. Not anymore. We moved between them, our footsteps echoing like whispers. Their lips moved as we passed, mouthing words I couldn't hear. At the altar stood a single figure, cloaked in crimson robes. His back was turned, his hands resting on the surface before him. As we approached, I saw what lay upon the altar, the heart of a ship suspended in amber light. It beat, slow and steady. Every pulse sent ripples of energy through the hall. When the figure spoke, his voice was calm, familiar. You've come far, Navigator. I froze. Cassian? He turned and my breath caught. It was him but not him. His face was unscarred, his eyes clear, filled with impossible light. You saw the storm. You felt its memory. Now you must understand it. Lucerne raised his weapon instinctively. You're dead. I saw you, Cassian smiled faintly. You saw the shell I left behind. The warp doesn't let go so easily. He gestured toward the pulsing heart. Do you know what this is? I stepped closer. The energy emanating from it was overwhelming. A rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. I whispered, It's alive. It's everywhere, Cassian said. Every ship that's ever crossed the Immaterium leaves a trace, a sliver of its soul. The warp gathers those traces. It builds them. It remembers them, Lucerne frowned. You mean this thing is made from the ghosts of ships? Not ghosts, Cassian said softly. Echoes. Fragments of every journey ever made. The warp storms are not destruction. They're preservation. Humanity has filled the void with its memories, its failures, its prayers, and now those memories want to be born again. I felt the truth of his words in my bones. The ship pulsed harder, the rhythm quickening. The figures in the pews began to stir, their prayers growing louder. What happens if it's born? I asked. Cassian's expression darkened. Then humanity will see what it truly is. Not a species of faith, but of obsession, of hunger, of endless need. The warp will no longer be a reflection. It will be a mirror that looks back. Lucerne took a step forward, his voice sharp. You're saying it wants to become us? Cassian turned to him slowly. No, Captain. It already has. Before Lucerne could respond, the altar split open with a sound like tearing metal. Light erupted from within, blinding, endless, alive. The figures in the pews lifted their heads, and for the first time I saw their faces. They were ours. Every crew member, every soul aboard the Eidolon duplicated and frozen in light. Each wore the same expression. Eyes wide, mouths open in silent scream. Lucerne shouted, Navigator, cut the link. Bring us back. But there was no link to sever. The Eidolon wasn't lost in the warp anymore, and it was the warp. I turned to Cassian, my voice breaking. Why show us this? Why me? His eyes softened. Because you can still choose. The warp is alive because we keep feeding it. Every memory, every war, every sacrifice, and it grows. You can end it or you can become part of it. What will you remember? The floor began to tremble. The heart on the altar pulsed violently, spilling light into the air. The walls cracked, revealing an endless void beyond, swirling with color, with faces, with the echo of every life that had ever touched the stars. I reached out, my hand brushing the heart, and for a single instant, I saw everything in the rise and fall of empires, the prayers of dying soldiers, the laughter of children born in the cold light of distant moons. Every moment of humanity's story condensed into a single aching heartbeat. The warp wasn't evil. It wasn't good. It was us. Cassian's voice was barely audible over the rising roar. Now you see. The storm was never coming for you. It was waiting for you to remember. Then the light swallowed everything. The forgotten god, I awoke to the sound of weeping. At first I thought it was human, the kind of soft, exhausted sorrow that follows loss. But as I opened my eyes, I realized it came from everywhere at once. The air itself was crying, the light was gone. The cathedral, the ship, the faces, all dissolved into endless mist. I floated weightless within a silence so deep it pressed against my chest. And in that silence the sobbing continued. Not loud, not violent, just eternal. Then through the fog a figure emerged. He was kneeling, head bowed, clad in robes of gold that shimmered like dying sunlight. His armor was ancient, cracked, and heavy with dust. I knew that silhouette. Every soul in the Imperium did. It was him, the Emperor. At least that's what my mind insisted. But as I drew closer, doubt began to take root. The figure's radiance was dimmer than I had ever imagined, his form smaller, fragile, as if memory itself had worn him down. When he finally looked up, his face was not light. It was human, eyes hollow, skin pale as parchment, a god carved down to a man. "Do you know what they've made of me?" he asked. His voice was not thunder. It was a whisper carried on dust. I tried to speak, but no sound came. The mist filled my throat, thick and warm like breath. "They pray," he said softly. "They beg. They build monuments, but not one of them remembers why." The fog rippled around him, images forming, flickering. Battlefields, thrones, cathedrals bathed in gold. I saw 1,000,000 worshippers kneeling beneath banners of the Aquila, their mouths open in praise. And yet beneath that devotion there was only fear. He raised his hand and the visions shattered. "I wanted to unite them," he whispered, "to free them from this." His gaze met mine, and I felt the weight of 10,000 years of silence. The Astronomicon pulsed faintly in the distance, a star burning itself to death to light the path for those who would never reach it. "You're not real," I said finally, my voice trembling. "You can't be." He almost smiled. "No, I'm what's left, what they remember. I am Faith's echo." Those words struck deeper than any blade. The Emperor I had prayed to my entire life, the radiant god of mankind, was nothing but memory now, a reflection sustained by the warp's hunger. He rose slowly, the air bending beneath his weight. "Do you hear it, Navigator? The crying? It's not the warp, it's the truth. Every soul that dies for my name adds to it. They think I guide them. I only remember them." I felt tears on my own face, though I hadn't realized I was crying. If this is true, then what is the warp storm? His eyes softened. My dream. Their dream. Humanity's dream. A storm made of longing. To be remembered. To be forgiven. Behind him the mist began to shift, forming shapes. The faces of the lost. The crew of the Eidolon, Cassian, Lucerne, even those I had never met. They surrounded me, murmuring, whispering prayers that had long since been forgotten. "They live in me," he said, "as do you. Every thought, every memory, every fear, all of it feeds the Immaterium. And so it grows, endless and unending, until one day it will not need you anymore." A cold realization crept through me. "Then the warp will outlive us," he nodded. "It already does." The weeping grew louder now, rising like the tide. The fog thickened, colors bleeding through it. Crimson, gold, violet, green. The same hues that danced across the warp's surface. I could feel the storm waking. "Can it be stopped?" I asked. He looked at me with something almost like pity. "Do you stop your own dreams? Even when they turn to nightmares?" I didn't answer. He stepped closer, placing a hand upon my shoulder. It was warm and impossibly so. "Then wake, Navigator. Wake, and remember what you've seen. The warp will not end, but perhaps it can learn to forgive." The world around me began to unravel. The mist tore apart, replaced by rushing wind and the metallic scream of collapsing reality. I felt myself falling, through memory, through time, through the boundary between what was human and what was not. As I fell, his voice followed me, faint and distant. "They will never know me as I was. But you will." And then I struck something solid, metal, cold and wet. I gasped for breath. I was back on the Eidolon. The lights flickered weakly overhead and the air smelled of promethium and blood. Bodies lay scattered across the deck, the crew unmoving, their eyes open and glassy. Lucerne sat slumped against the command throne, a faint smile frozen on his lips. In his hand he clutched a small data slate, its screen cracked but still glowing. I knelt beside him, prying it free. The words flickered across the surface. A log entry time-stamped only moments ago. "The storm is memory. We are fragments. If anyone finds this, remember us. I looked out the viewport. The warp still raged outside, but its light had changed. Softer now, quieter, almost mournful. The storm had not ended. But perhaps for the first time it understood. Then, from somewhere deep within the ship, the vox crackled to life. Faint, distorted. Navigator. My heart stopped. Cassian, static. Then faintly. Not Cassian. Not anymore. The voice was calm, vast, and familiar. I told you. I remember everything. The voice filled every corner of the Eidolon. Soft but absolute, like the whisper of a tide that could drown worlds. I remember everything. The lights along the ceiling flickered as though the ship itself had inhaled. Shadows twisted across the walls, bending into human shapes before melting away again. I could feel it watching, not from outside, but from within the metal itself. Who are you? I whispered. A low hum answered, spreading through the deck plates like a heartbeat. Then the vox crackled once more. I am what remains when gods fall silent. The tone was calm, but beneath it ran something deeper. Sorrow, endless and ancient. I looked toward the command console. Its display flickered alive, showing not the warp, but the Eidolon's own schematics, veins of golden energy running through every corridor. The lines pulsed, brightening in rhythm with the voice. Lucerne's body shifted slightly, his fingers twitching as if in answer. I froze. The voice continued, Your captain has not left. None of them have. The warp does not destroy. It collects. It remembers. A sudden gust of static surged through the vox. I could hear the faint sound of breathing, and not mine. Hundreds of breaths layered together, each one slightly out of time. I took a step back. You're the ship, I said softly. You've merged with them. Yes, it replied. And with you. You are all threads in the same memory. The air grew heavy. The lights dimmed until the bridge was awash in shadow and gold. Somewhere deep within the hull, something groaned. An ancient, slow sound, as if the ship itself was stretching its limbs after a long sleep. You spoke to him, the voice said. You saw the echo that calls itself Emperor. My heart pounded. Then you saw it too? I was born from it. From his silence. From the prayers he could not answer. The warp needed a tongue, and it shaped one. From ships like me, from minds like yours. The words sank into me like gravity. The storm wasn't just the Emperor's dream. It was the consequence of his silence, the collective ache of billions who never stopped praying. What do you want? I asked. To remember without pain. The simplicity of it almost broke me. Every memory becomes a storm. It continued. Every soul that dies with unfinished faith feeds me. I hold them all, and yet I am never whole. I want to rest. Something inside me, some small, stubborn part of my humanity, refused to accept that. If you rest, does that mean the warp ends? No, the voice said. The warp never ends, but the suffering might. Outside the viewport, the colors of the storm began to shift, red fading into blue, blue into silver. I felt the pull lessen. The violent currents were calming, and then the voice grew quiet. Navigator, there is a path open now. I can take you back, to real space, to the stars that still remember light. But if I do, I will forget myself. I hesitated. Forget? Yes, every ship, every soul, every moment that I've held will fade. I will fall silent and the storms will break apart. But if I stay, I will keep remembering forever. It was a choice, not between life and death, but between mercy and immortality. I walked to the viewport, staring into the shifting storm. Somewhere out there, I knew Terra still burned with the light of the Astronomicon. Humanity still sailed its fragile fleets across this endless sea of ghosts. And here, within the storm, an entire world of memory begged for release. What happens to us if you forget? I asked quietly. You will return, the voice said. Your bodies will be whole. Time will resume. No one will know what you saw. You will believe it was only a moment lost to the warp. And if I stay? The hum deepened, reverent. Then you will never die. You will become part of the song. Part of me. I thought of Lucerne, of Cassian, of the countless names carved into data slates across the Imperium. People remembered only as statistics, as reports, as footnotes to a war that never ended. And I thought of the Emperor's words. They will never know me as I was. But you will. Maybe memory itself was mercy. Maybe it was damnation. My hand trembled as I reached toward the console. If you let go, I said, then who remembers you? For a long moment the ship was silent. Then softly, you will. The energy pulsing through the bridge began to flicker faster, brighter. The floor vibrated. Panels burst open, spilling arcs of light that twisted like liquid flame. The hum rose into a choir of impossible voices. The crew, the lost, the dead, all singing the same final word, remember. And then one last time I heard Cassian. Whatever you choose. Don't let it be forgotten. The console in front of me split into two lights, one gold, warm, pulsing toward real space, the other white, cold, drawing me deeper into the storm. Both paths shimmered with memory. I closed my eyes. The ship whispered. Almost lovingly, choose. The sound of the warp faded to a low murmur, and the air went still. When I opened my eyes, the console was dark. The hum was gone. The Eidolon drifted silently through the void, the storm fading behind us like the echo of a dream. The crew lay still, not dead, but sleeping. Their faces peaceful, their breaths shallow and even. For the first time in what felt like eternity, I saw stars again. But somewhere, just at the edge of hearing, I thought I could still make out a voice. Not a cry, not a scream, just a whisper I remember. The last light silence. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, silence wrapped around me like a shroud. The warp was gone. The storm had vanished. Only the steady hum of the Eidolon's failing engines remained, weak but real. The sound of metal remembering how to live. I stood alone on the bridge. My breath fogged faintly in the cold air. The consoles were dark, their glow long faded. The stars shimmered through the viewport, distant, sharp, impossibly calm. For a long time, I simply stared. How long had it been since I'd seen the stars? How long since I'd felt the steady rhythm of real space beneath my feet? The air felt heavier somehow, bolder. The ship's chronometers were dead, but the void itself seemed to carry the weight of centuries. I walked to the main display and tried to access the navigation data. It flickered weakly to life, then stopped, frozen on a single symbol. A double-headed eagle, but not the one I knew. This one was different. Its wings stretched wider, its talons wrapped around not a world, but a flame. And beneath it were words I had never seen before. Imperium reborn. My heart clenched. How long had we been gone? The vox crackled suddenly. Static, faint at first, then clear, a signal, a human voice. Unidentified vessel, this is Imperial Command. You are entering restricted space, identify. My throat went dry. I pressed the transmission rune. This is Navigator Solenvare of the Eidolon. We were lost to the warp. Silence on the other end. Then quietly, the Eidolon? That ship disappeared over 200 years ago. The words hit harder than any shockwave. 200 years. The crew and my people still lay asleep below decks, frozen in the last moment of peace before the warp had swallowed them. The voice continued, cautious but curious. How did you survive the storms? I hesitated. What could I possibly tell them? That the storm itself had spoken? That the souls of the dead had merged with the ship? That I had bargained with something born from silence? We were guided, I said softly, by something that remembered us. A pause. Then more gently. Navigator, welcome home. Home. The word felt strange. Heavy. A few hours later, recovery ships surrounded us. Sleek, golden hulls with symbols I didn't recognize. They guided the Eidolon toward orbit, their lights gliding like silent guardians. When I stepped out onto the docking ramp, I saw what had become of the Imperium. The sky above the world glowed faintly with energy. Not the dark, consuming storm of the warp, but something gentler, radiant. Ships moved in elegant patterns. Cathedrals of light towered on the horizon, their spires piercing the clouds like glass spears, and at the heart of every structure burned the same sigil, the flame I'd seen on the eagle's talons. They called it the lumen. It wasn't just a new symbol. It was a new faith. An officer approached, her armor white and gold, her face calm but curious. Navigator Vare, she said, you've returned from the oldest storm. You carry what we've lost. What is this place? I asked. The Imperium of Light, she said. built from the remnants of the old. The warp storms ended a century ago. No one knows why. I felt a shiver pass through me. I looked toward the sky. And for a brief moment I thought I saw it. A flicker. A shimmer of gold threading through the clouds, not chaotic, not screaming, just remembering. She led me through the halls of their fortress, and everywhere I turned I saw faces at peace. No chanting, no fear of demons. They still prayed, but their words were softer, grateful, calm. In one vast chamber stood a towering figure of light. Not the Emperor, at least not as I remembered him. This was a being sculpted from flame and memory, its form shifting like sunlight through glass, and beneath it, carved into stone, he who was lost to the storm, found peace in remembrance. I reached out to touch the base of the statue. The surface was warm, impossibly so. A faint hum echoed beneath my fingers, and then a whisper, so quiet it might have been the air itself. I remember. I closed my eyes. A slow breath escaped me. The storm had ended. Not because it was destroyed, but because it learned. It had let go. Maybe it had forgotten its pain. Maybe it had found peace through the act of remembering everything, and then finally releasing it. I walked out onto a high balcony overlooking the world. The sun was rising. Real sunlight. The officer beside me spoke softly, almost reverently. They say every few nights a whisper moves across the void. Not a storm. Not a threat. Just a voice that says one word. I smiled faintly. I know. What word? She asked. I looked toward the dawn, and somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond the quiet hum of the cosmos, I could still feel it. That lingering thread of warmth, that presence I had once called horror, now turned to light. Remember, I whispered. And as the sun broke across the world, the light touched the Eidolon's scarred hull, and for just a moment, it glowed. The stars shimmered softly in response, as if a vast ocean had finally fallen still. The warp was quiet. The storms were gone. But the memory remained, and maybe that was enough. In the end, the warp was never a curse, and it was a mirror. It showed us what we are, what we fear, and what we choose to remember. If you ever find yourself adrift in darkness, listen closely. The storm is not the end. It's memory learning to let go. If this story calmed your thoughts tonight, Traveler of the Stars, subscribe to stay with us on our next journey through forgotten histories, ancient empires, and the secrets that sleep between worlds. Until then, sleep well under the light of remembered suns.